There are penalties in racing that everyone shrugs off, and then there are penalties that turn a Sunday night into a full-blown courtroom drama. What happened to Bubba Wallace at Atlanta belongs firmly in the second category, and by the time you understand the full sequence of events, you will realize why even his own team owner could not build a case against the ruling. Let's set the scene first, because the chaos of that night matters just as much as the final lap move itself. The race had already been delayed for more than 3 hours because of rain and lightning, and by the time cars were finally taking the white flag, the clock had ticked well past 1 a.m. Ryan Blaney had been the class of the field all night. He started on the pole, swept both stages, and led well over 150 laps in dominant fashion. It looked, for most of the evening, like a formality. Then, with only a handful of laps remaining, a multi-car incident collected several drivers and forced NASCAR into overtime, wiping away what should have been a comfortable win and setting up one of the wildest finishes of the season. When the race restarted, Carson Hocevar was out front, with Bubba Wallace running third. As the field took the white flag for the final time, Wallace gave Blaney a shove from behind, which sent Blaney sliding up toward Hocevar on the outside. In that split second, a gap opened up on the bottom of the racetrack, and Wallace committed to it without hesitation. He dove low, trying to complete a 3-wide move for the win, and in doing so his left side tires slipped beneath the double yellow line that marks the edge of the racing surface. For a few tense seconds, all 3 cars ran side by side through the final corners. Wallace got hard on the brakes, ran out of racetrack, and rejoined the racing surface back in third place, essentially where he had started the move. In the final yards, a push from Ty Gibbs carried him up to second at the checkered flag, while Christopher Bell's shove helped send Blaney across the line first. Wallace crossed the stripe thinking he had locked up a runner-up finish and a healthy points day. That is not how it played out. NASCAR reviewed the move and black flagged him for going below the double yellow line, dropping him from an apparent second-place finish all the way down to 29th, the last car still on the lead lap. 27 championship points vanished in an instant. Wallace headed straight to his team's hauler, pulled the data with his crew chief and his team's director of competition, and then walked into a 31-minute meeting with NASCAR officials to make his case. When he finally emerged, series officials confirmed the ruling was final and could not be appealed. All Wallace had left to say was that a penalty is a penalty. Before that meeting, though, Wallace laid out his defense to reporters, and on the surface it sounds like a genuinely strong argument. He pointed out that he entered the corner in third place and exited in third place. Nobody was passed. Nobody lost a spot because of him. He said he was riding the brakes the entire way through, trying desperately to tuck back in line rather than force his way past anyone, and that his car actually got loose and slowed him down because he knew the move wasn't clean. His summary was simple. He went in third, he came out third, and only a late push from a teammate-adjacent car moved him up to second. By his logic, since nobody was displaced, there was nothing to penalize. It is a compelling argument right up until you actually look at the wording of the rule NASCAR enforces. The relevant section of the rulebook says that if a car goes below the double yellow line to improve its position, it will be penalized. Wallace and his team leaned heavily on the finishing result, arguing that since his position didn't actually improve by the checkered flag, the rule shouldn't apply to him. But that reading misses the most important word in the sentence. Interestingly, one of the clearest breakdowns of why the penalty was correct came from someone with every reason to defend Wallace, his own team co-owner, a veteran driver with decades of experience in the sport. Discussing it on his podcast, he admitted that the moment he saw the replay live, he knew a penalty was coming because he understood exactly how that rule is written and enforced. He explained that the rule was never really about whether you gain a position by the end of the race. It's about whether you use the space below the line to put yourself in a position to gain, regardless of what happens afterward. The key word in the rule, he pointed out, is the word to. It doesn't say a car that goes below the line and improves its position gets black flagged. It says a car that goes below the line to improve its position gets black flagged. The attempt itself is the violation, not the final outcome. He offered a simple way to think about it. Imagine that yellow line as an invisible wall. It isn't concrete, you won't crash into it, but the moment your tires cross it, it doesn't matter whether you actually gained anything from doing so. That's the violation, full stop. Then came the detail that really dismantled Wallace's argument about never advancing at all. While the camera angle at the finish line made it look like Wallace simply rejoined in third with no gain, a different camera angle from the middle of turns 3 and 4 told a very different story. At that moment, in the heat of the move, Wallace was actually the furthest car forward of the three. For a fraction of a second, on the final lap of the race, he was technically leading. The hard braking that dropped him back to third happened after that moment, not before it. So even though the finish line result made it look clean, somewhere in the middle of that move he briefly held the lead, and he only got there because his tires had gone below the line. To be fair, there was real sympathy for why Wallace made the move in the first place. At Atlanta, the transition between the actual racing surface and the apron below it is subtle. There isn't much difference in banking, and in the chaos of a 2 a.m. finish with a win on the line, drivers are making split-second decisions with very little visual reference. Wallace was going for the biggest possible gap, hoping for a shove from a teammate, because it was genuinely his only realistic shot at the win. Going for it in that moment was completely understandable from a competitive standpoint. Understandable, however, is not the same as legal. NASCAR's own communications team backed up every part of that explanation once reporters pressed them for details. Officials confirmed that trying to give a position back after the fact simply doesn't matter under this rule, and they confirmed that yes, at one specific point in the move, Wallace briefly held the lead. If a caution had come out at that exact moment, he technically would have been declared the leader of the race. They also made clear that a full pass doesn't need to be completed for the rule to apply. Being just a fraction of an inch ahead of the next car counts as improving position, and once you understand that standard, the ruling becomes very hard to argue against. Their bottom line was simple: Wallace would never have reached that position on the racetrack without first dropping below the line to get there. It's also worth noting that NASCAR praised how professionally Wallace's team handled the entire process. Given how much was on the line and how big the swing in finishing position was, team officials could easily have come out swinging in anger. Instead, by all accounts, the protest and appeal process were handled respectfully and calmly from start to finish. Then there was the verdict that really closed the book on the debate, delivered by a former Cup Series champion with plenty of experience making exactly this kind of desperate, late-race move himself. Speaking on his own podcast, he was asked point-blank whether there was any real argument in Wallace's favor, and his answer left almost no room for debate. He said this is actually a pretty easy rule to apply in practice. Once you watch a car go from being behind two others to being beside them, it's extremely difficult to argue that no advantage was gained in the process. Before the move, Wallace was tucked in behind both cars ahead of him. After the move, he was racing them side by side for the win. The only thing that got him from one situation to the other was that trip below the double yellow line. He was careful to add that this wasn't a case of Wallace trying to cheat. In the chaos and adrenaline of a nearly 2 a.m. finish, drivers can simply lose track of exactly where they are on a racetrack relative to the boundary lines. It was a human mistake made under enormous pressure, not a calculated attempt to bend the rules. But a human mistake, however understandable, doesn't change whether the penalty itself was correctly applied. What made his commentary especially interesting is that he then opened up a completely different conversation, one that NASCAR will likely have to reckon with going forward. He questioned whether the double yellow line rule even makes sense at a track like Atlanta in the first place. His reasoning was that the rule was designed for true superspeedways, where a car dropping onto a flat, low-grip apron at nearly 200 miles an hour can become unstable and shoot back up into traffic, causing a massive multi-car wreck. That is a genuine safety concern at those speedway-style tracks. But Atlanta's banking and apron are rough and bumpy in a very different way, and going below the line there tends to simply slow a car down and unsettle it, rather than create the kind of dangerous, uncontrollable situation the rule was originally written to prevent. In his own words, he could honestly see the argument both ways. This isn't the first time the rule has sparked controversy either. It has been on the books for roughly a quarter of a century, and it has produced plenty of contentious moments over the years, from a driver being stripped of a win years ago at a superspeedway, to multiple penalties and reversals during a chaotic playoff race, to a similar below-the-line penalty handed out at this very same track a few seasons back. 2 decades of judgment calls, protests, and after-the-fact debates, and it all comes down to a single phrase in the rulebook about NASCAR's own determination of intent. For Wallace personally, the consequences are very real. A night where he led laps and ran competitively at the front for most of the race instead nets him almost nothing in the point standings. He's now had a stretch of results that puts him closer to the playoff cut line than his team would like, and he knows full well that every driver chasing that final playoff spot is watching his recent stumble closely, looking for an opening. So where does that leave things? The team accepted the call. NASCAR explained the call in detail, and a former champion who has been in that exact high-pressure spot himself backed the call completely, all while raising a fair question about whether the rule truly belongs at every track it currently covers. The penalty, under the rule as written, was correct. Whether that rule should still apply at a place like Atlanta going forward is a genuinely open question, and it's one that will keep coming up every single time a driver finds themselves eyeing that same gap on a final lap, wondering if it's worth the risk. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.